Every great story begins with a moment that feels small, a simple decision, a quiet act, or a single word spoken in faith. The story of Ruth begins just like that, not in triumph or comfort, but in ordinary life touched by extraordinary purpose. It is a story that speaks across the centuries, carrying themes of love, loyalty, and divine redemption that remain as powerful today as they were in the days of ancient Israel. Beneath its gentle rhythm of harvests and homecomings lies a message that reaches into every human heart, that even in loss, grace is near, and even in silence, God is still writing. Long before Ruth's name was known, her world was shaped by struggle. The time of the judges was marked by chaos and confusion, when people wandered far from the path of faith and hope seemed fragile. Yet even in that uncertainty, God was preparing something sacred. The land, though weary and broken, would soon become the stage for one of the most beautiful acts of love ever recorded. In the midst of moral decay and famine, a quiet miracle was about to unfold, not through kings or warriors, but through a foreign woman whose faith would outshine the darkness of her age. Every heart knows what it means to lose direction, to stand at the crossroads between despair and trust. Ruth's journey reminds us that even when life falls apart, purpose still lives within the ruins. Her story begins in famine, moves through exile, and blooms in faith. A reminder that sometimes redemption does not come as thunder from heaven, but as a whisper guiding us one step at a time. Her love for Naomi, her courage to leave everything familiar, and her faith in a God she barely knew would one day shape history itself. Ruth's name would become a symbol of loyalty that never fades, yet before her devotion was honored, it was tested. She walked through hardship with quiet strength, carrying in her heart a love that refused to break. Her story invites us to see beauty in faith that does not demand signs, but simply believes. It teaches that the greatest expressions of love often happen in the smallest moments, when we choose kindness over bitterness, hope over despair, and faith over fear. Through her journey, we see that even the most broken beginnings can lead to divine endings. Generations have passed, yet Ruth's story still speaks because it tells the truth about what it means to love faithfully. It is not a tale of fairy tale romance, but of real devotion, the kind that sacrifices, endures, and redeems. In her story, we discover that love rooted in faith is stronger than circumstance, and loyalty born from the heart can transform not only one life, but the destiny of many. Her path reminds us that God's greatest works are often hidden in humble obedience, waiting for hearts willing to trust. If stories like this inspire you, stories that reveal faith, love, and hope in the face of hardship, make sure to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps these timeless messages reach more hearts around the world, reminding others that love and faith still have the power to change lives today. Famine struck the land like an invisible enemy, creeping across the hills of Judah and settling in the valleys that once overflowed with grain. Hunger has a way of humbling even the proudest heart, reminding people that their strength depends on forces they cannot command. Fields that once offered abundance stood barren, and the laughter of harvest songs fell silent. Families who once traded their crops now bartered memories for survival. Among them was a man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, from the small town of Bethlehem. Ironically named House of Bread, Bethlehem could no longer sustain them. When the storehouses emptied and the ground refused to yield, desperation became the master of their decisions. Leaving one's homeland was not a choice made lightly. In ancient Israel, land was more than soil. It was identity, inheritance, the physical mark of belonging to a covenant people. To walk away from it was to step into uncertainty and to risk losing not only livelihood but legacy. Yet hunger does not negotiate with sentiment. As Elimelech gathered his family for the journey eastward, perhaps his eyes lingered on the hills of Judah, knowing that each step forward meant leaving behind generations of memory. Ahead lay Moab, a foreign land, a place both near and distant, where their ancestors had once faced hostility. Crossing the border into Moab must have carried the heavy silence of resignation. Each mile would have echoed with questions, whether they had done right, whether they would find safety, whether they would ever return. The desert winds that brushed against their faces carried no answers, only the unspoken truth that life often forces people to walk roads they would never have chosen. Behind them lay famine, before them uncertainty. Between those two realities, faith struggled to breathe. Arrival in Moab brought relief, but not belonging. Foreign customs, foreign gods, and unfamiliar tongues surrounded them. Elimelech, once a man rooted in the soil of promise, became a stranger in another man's field. Hidden beneath the surface of survival was the preparation for something divine. Ruth's path, though yet unseen, was being laid stone by stone through decisions made in hardship. Elimelech's family sought refuge in a foreign land, unaware that this journey would one day become the birthplace of redemption. Years passed, and life in Moab took on a fragile rhythm. Hunger no longer haunted them, but the ache of distance never fully disappeared. Naomi, perhaps, would look toward the horizon at dusk, where the sun sank over the hills of her homeland, and wonder if she would ever see Bethlehem again. In her heart, she carried both gratitude for provision and sorrow for separation. The weight of displacement lingers long after hunger fades, because it touches the soul more deeply than the body. Human plans often unfold with confident beginnings, yet destiny has its own design. The decision to leave Bethlehem seemed necessary, even wise, but the years in Moab would bring losses far greater than famine. What began as a journey to preserve life would soon become a journey through grief, shaping hearts in ways no one could foresee. Every departure carries the seed of transformation, and this family's exile was not a punishment, but a preparation. The path toward redemption often begins in places that feel like abandonment, and the soil of promise is sometimes found far from home. No one could have known that out of Moab, the land of strangers, would rise a woman whose faith would alter history. The famine that forced movement, the hunger that drove decisions, were not random turns of fate, but threads woven into a greater pattern. In the silence of that migration, in the weary steps across barren ground, heaven was already at work, shaping a story of love and loyalty that would one day point the world back to hope. When Elimelech's family settled in Moab, it might have looked like defeat. Yet every movement in their story carried divine intention. What seemed like escape was actually the beginning of divine orchestration. In the vast uncertainty of human struggle, God often hides purpose in plain sight. And so the family that fled famine unknowingly stepped into a destiny that would one day bring redemption not only to themselves, but to generations yet unborn. Life in Moab began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. Elimelech's death left Naomi a widow in a land not her own, a woman without protection or provision in a culture that valued both. Her sons, Mahlon and Chilion, married Moabite women Ruth and Orpah, offering a glimmer of continuity and comfort. Yet even that small joy was short-lived. Both sons died without leaving children, and Naomi's world darkened into silence. In a single span of years, she lost her husband, her sons, her security, and the promise of future generations. Grief, when it settles deeply, changes everything. The laughter that once filled a home becomes memory. The sound of voices once familiar becomes an echo. Naomi's hands, once busy with the tasks of family life, now found nothing to hold. Each sunrise must have felt like a cruel reminder that life continued even when hers had stopped. She had left Bethlehem seeking life and found only loss. The emptiness inside her grew heavier than the journey that had brought her there. Pain has a way of making faith feel distant. Naomi had known the stories of her people, of Abraham's faith, of Moses' courage, of Joshua's victories. In her mourning, those stories may have felt like distant legends, detached from her reality. It is one thing to believe in God's providence when life flourishes, and another when everything you love is buried in foreign soil. Her heart, once open to hope, closed around the bitterness of loss until even her name felt too heavy to carry. When word reached Moab that the famine in Judah had ended, something stirred within her. Not hope exactly, but a faint sense of direction. She would return home, though she no longer called it home in her heart. She rose to leave the place that had taken everything from her. Perhaps she thought of her husband and sons as she packed what little remained. Perhaps she whispered their names as she looked one last time toward the graves she could not take with her. As Naomi set out, her daughters-in-law followed, loyal and uncertain. She urged them to return to their families, to rebuild their lives in Moab, to find husbands and stability. Her words were soaked in sorrow, yet spoken with genuine care. She could not imagine a future for herself, so she tried to free them from sharing her despair. Orpah wept and kissed her goodbye, choosing to stay, while Ruth clung to her, refusing to let go. It was a moment heavy with emotion, a crossroads between resignation and faith. Naomi's words to those she loved were filled with the rawness of someone who had tasted life's bitterness. She told them, "Call me Mara," meaning bitter, for she felt the Almighty had dealt harshly with her. In those words was no rebellion, only exhaustion. The name Naomi, meaning pleasant, no longer felt true. Grief had redefined her, and she could not see beyond it. Yet the same God she felt had emptied her was preparing to fill her life again, though she could not yet see it. The heart that has known deep pain becomes the soil for compassion and understanding. Naomi's suffering would one day make her a vessel of wisdom and guidance for Ruth. Her journey through loss would teach her to recognize redemption when it appeared. Even in her bitterness, she remained part of a divine story. God does not erase sorrow, but he transforms it, weaving meaning through it until what once felt unbearable becomes a bridge to healing. Moab had taken everything Naomi cherished, yet in leaving it, she carried something precious she did not yet recognize. The devotion of Ruth, the seed of renewal, the silent presence of grace. Every loss she endured was shaping her heart to receive something beyond her imagining. Sometimes pain must strip away what we cling to before we can see what truly matters. Her path back to Bethlehem was not just a return to a homeland, it was the beginning of restoration, though she could not yet call it that. Two women stood on a dusty road between Moab and Judah, one old and weary, the other young and determined. Naomi had pleaded with Ruth to stay behind, to choose security over uncertainty, yet Ruth's heart refused to turn back. In that moment, a decision was born that would echo through eternity. Ruth looked at the woman she loved and saw not despair, but a bond worth following, even into poverty. Her words, spoken with trembling conviction, carried a depth that history would never forget. "Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Such words were not a declaration of sentiment, but of covenant. Ruth was not merely pledging companionship, she was surrendering her future. She was leaving behind her homeland, her language, her gods, and the safety of familiarity. Everything that had defined her identity would be left behind on that road. The courage it took to make such a choice came not from logic, but from love that transcended circumstance. It was an act of faith disguised as loyalty, a decision that would open heaven's plan. Naomi must have looked at Ruth and seen both beauty and mystery. Perhaps she tried to reason with her again, urging her to turn back, but Ruth's eyes held resolve. The road ahead was uncertain, yet her heart had already crossed the line between fear and faith. She had glimpsed something in Naomi's life, perhaps in her quiet endurance or in the stories she had told of the God of Israel, that drew her with an unexplainable pull. In Naomi's sorrow, Ruth saw truth, and in that truth she found purpose. The power of Ruth's decision lies not in its grandeur, but in its simplicity. She chose presence over comfort, loyalty over safety, love over logic. Each step toward Bethlehem would carry her farther from what she knew, yet closer to what she was meant to become. Many people seek miracles, but few realize that the greatest miracles begin with a single step of faith in the direction of love. Ruth's journey was not a flight toward promise, but a walk into uncertainty guided by devotion. As they traveled, the road must have stretched endlessly before them, winding through valleys and across barren fields. The sun would have burned against their backs, and yet neither stopped. Naomi's heart, heavy with grief, may have found quiet strength in Ruth's presence. Every mile deepened their bond. What began as shared sorrow became shared purpose. Together they walked, two widows against the world, bound by something far stronger than circumstance, unbreakable loyalty. Bethlehem lay somewhere beyond the horizon, a place Naomi once called home but now approached as a stranger. For Ruth, it was an unknown world where her Moabite heritage might mark her as an outsider. Yet she did not turn away. The love that guided her was not seeking approval. It was rooted in conviction. In following Naomi, she was also following God's call, though she may not have understood it in those terms. Faith, at its truest, often begins with obedience that does not yet see the outcome. Ruth's words, spoken on that road, were more than comfort for a grieving mother-in-law. They were the foundation of a legacy. Her loyalty would one day lead to redemption for both of them and for generations beyond. In her act of devotion, the story of God's faithfulness found a new expression. She embodied the truth that love rooted in faith can cross every boundary, national, cultural, and spiritual, and transform the course of history. When the two women finally turned their faces toward Bethlehem, they carried little more than each other. Yet within that companionship lay the seed of everything that was to come. Ruth's decision to stay was not an end to her story, but its true beginning. Love had chosen its path, and through that path divine destiny was set in motion, waiting just beyond the hills of Judah. Dust rose beneath weary feet as Ruth and Naomi entered Bethlehem, the town murmuring with life at the edge of harvest. Women drew water from the wells, merchants called out in the marketplace, and the scent of barley hung in the air. Yet among the laughter and movement, two figures stood apart, worn by travel and time. Naomi's name stirred whispers. Her return carried both curiosity and compassion. Years had passed since she left, and now she stood not as the woman who departed, but as one reshaped by sorrow. Ruth, a foreigner from Moab, walked beside her silently, her eyes taking in this new land that would soon become her world. Crowds tend to look quickly and judge quietly. The sight of Naomi, aged by loss, might have evoked pity, but the presence of a Moabite woman beside her stirred unease. Moabites were known as outsiders, their people long estranged from Israel's faith and fellowship. Yet Ruth's posture was one of quiet dignity, her loyalty evident in every step. She had chosen this place not for comfort, but out of devotion. Beneath the surface of that humble arrival, unseen purposes stirred, and the fields of Bethlehem would soon become the ground where divine kindness would take root. Life for widows in ancient Israel was marked by hardship. Without husbands or inheritance, survival depended on the generosity of others. Ruth understood this reality with practical clarity. As harvest began, she asked Naomi's permission to glean among the sheaves, gathering what the reapers left behind. It was a humble task, one granted by the law to the poor and the stranger, yet it carried a quiet grace. Each stalk she picked up was an act of faith, a step toward sustenance, and perhaps without knowing it, a step toward destiny. Morning light spilled across the fields as Ruth bent to gather the fallen grain. Around her, workers moved with practiced rhythm, their scythes flashing in the sunlight. Her hands grew calloused, her back ached, but her heart held peace. There was purpose in the labor, dignity in the effort. Every handful she gathered whispered a truth that has echoed through generations, that those who remain steadfast in the smallest tasks often find themselves nearest to divine favor. A man named Boaz owned the field where Ruth worked, a man of noble character and quiet strength. His reputation for integrity had spread throughout Bethlehem, yet he carried himself with humility. When he arrived among the reapers, his greeting, "May the Lord be with you," reflected not only faith, but genuine kindness. His eyes noticed the young woman gleaning at the edge of his land, her posture marked by both diligence and grace. She did not demand attention. It found her naturally through the sincerity of her work. Upon learning her story, Boaz was moved by what he heard. He knew of her loyalty to Naomi, how she had left her homeland to care for her mother-in-law and live among a people not her own. Such devotion stirred admiration and respect. He approached Ruth, not with authority, but with gentleness, assuring her that she would find safety in his fields and that his servants would not harm her. He invited her to drink from the water drawn for his workers, an act of generosity that spoke of both compassion and acceptance. Ruth's heart swelled with gratitude. She bowed before him, overwhelmed that someone of his stature would show such kindness to a foreigner. Her voice trembled as she asked why he had noticed her. Boaz replied that her deeds had been heard throughout Bethlehem, that her loyalty had spoken louder than any words. He reminded her that she had sought refuge under the wings of Israel's God, a phrase that carried the tenderness of divine shelter. In that moment, Ruth felt seen, not as an outsider, but as one embraced by grace. Days passed, and Ruth continued to glean under Boaz's protection. Each evening she returned to Naomi with arms full of grain and heart full of quiet wonder. Naomi watched her with growing awareness that something holy was unfolding. The fields that had once represented struggle now shimmered with possibility. Through Ruth's faithfulness and Boaz's kindness, a story of redemption was beginning to take shape, though none could yet see how far its roots would reach. Early mornings in Bethlehem carried the scent of dew and ripened grain, a reminder that life had returned to the land after years of famine. Ruth continued to rise with the dawn, her steps steady, her spirit anchored in purpose. The fields became her sanctuary, a place where labor met divine favor. Work done in humility has a way of drawing grace, and her diligence did not go unnoticed. Boaz observed her often from a distance, not as one watching possession, but as a man moved by genuine admiration. Kindness flows naturally from hearts aligned with God's character. Boaz, though a man of wealth, carried no trace of arrogance. His concern for those who worked for him was evident, his generosity sincere. He spoke to his young men, ensuring that Ruth would be treated with respect. He even instructed them to leave extra grain for her to gather, a silent provision that she would never have presumed to ask for. Grace often works this way, quietly, unexpectedly, reaching those who simply remain faithful in their calling. Ruth's gratitude was not merely spoken but lived. Each day she labored without complaint, her movements reflecting discipline and hope. To her, gleaning was not humiliation but opportunity. Every piece of grain she gathered represented both survival and faithfulness. The humility with which she worked mirrored the heart of one who trusts in goodness even before it is fully revealed. Those who saw her began to sense something extraordinary, a quiet strength that could not be explained by circumstance alone. Naomi watched as provisions filled their home, and her heart began to soften. The woman, once consumed by bitterness, felt warmth returning. When Ruth spoke of Boaz, Naomi recognized the name and realized he was a relative, one with the right to redeem their family's inheritance. Her words to Ruth carried new life, her tone shifting from despair to possibility. She saw in Boaz's kindness the reflection of divine care. The same God she thought had abandoned her was gently weaving restoration into her days. Boaz continued to extend favor toward Ruth, inviting her to share meals with his workers. During one such meal, he offered her roasted grain, serving her personally until she was satisfied. Simple gestures like these revealed the depth of his compassion. It was not charity born of pity, but honor born of respect. Ruth's humility and strength had touched something deep within him, awakening not only admiration but purpose. Love often begins this way, not through grand gestures, but through consistent kindness that nourishes both body and soul. Grace does not rush. It builds quietly until it transforms everything it touches. Boaz's actions toward Ruth mirrored the character of God's redemption, unhurried, selfless, intentional. His protection of her in the fields was not merely about safety, it was an expression of divine provision through human hands. He became the channel through which heaven's kindness reached the heart of a foreign widow, and through that kindness a legacy of faith was being born. Evenings found Ruth and Naomi sharing bread and conversation, their home once empty, now filled with laughter. Hope had returned in the form of daily provision and genuine care. Naomi began to see beyond survival. She recognized the shaping of something sacred. Ruth's hard work and Boaz's compassion were converging into a story greater than either of them could imagine. Each act of kindness was a thread, and together they were weaving redemption's pattern. Grace finds those who keep walking, who keep working even when they do not yet see reward. Ruth's hands, rough from labor, held more than grain. They held the promise of a future not yet revealed. Her diligence became the stage on which divine kindness would perform its most beautiful act. And as she continued to glean beneath Bethlehem's sun, heaven smiled upon her perseverance, knowing that through her faithfulness, love would soon take shape in human form. Harvest season reached its fullness, and with it came the time of threshing, when grain was separated from chaff. Fields that had echoed with the sound of reapers now pulsed with celebration. Boaz, like many landowners, oversaw the work with both pride and gratitude. Ruth and Naomi watched the rhythm of the season unfold, aware that something significant was drawing near. Naomi, with renewed wisdom, spoke to Ruth about Boaz, recognizing him as a potential redeemer. Her counsel carried both maternal care and spiritual insight. She urged Ruth to approach Boaz with humility, to remind him of his role within the family line. As night settled over the threshing floor, stars shimmered against the quiet sky. Ruth prepared herself with care, not out of vanity but respect. Her heart beat steadily as she walked toward the place where Boaz rested beside the grain. The air carried the scent of harvest and hope. This act was not driven by seduction, but by faith. She came as one seeking protection, not privilege, invoking the ancient custom that allowed a woman to appeal to a kinsman redeemer. Ruth approached quietly, her steps softened by the night. She uncovered Boaz's feet and lay down, a gesture of humility and trust. The stillness of that moment held profound symbolism. The act of resting at his feet spoke of surrender and refuge, a plea for covering, both literal and spiritual. When Boaz awoke and found her there, surprise must have flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by understanding. He listened as she spoke, her voice calm yet trembling, asking him to spread his garment over her, for he was a redeemer. Boaz's response revealed his depth of character. Rather than recoiling or misjudging her intentions, he spoke with tenderness and reverence. He blessed her for showing kindness not only to Naomi, but also to him. Recognizing that her motives were guided by integrity, his words carried assurance, promising to do all that was right and lawful. Yet he also mentioned that another relative was closer in line to redeem, a detail that would require patience and wisdom. Even so, his tone conveyed protection and care, not uncertainty. Night lingered softly around them as they spoke. The threshing floor became more than a place of work. It became a sanctuary of faith. Two lives, shaped by obedience, met under the canopy of divine timing. Ruth's courage in approaching Boaz reflected her trust in God's plan, and Boaz's response embodied grace, guided by righteousness. Under the covering of that night, hearts aligned with purpose greater than themselves. Before dawn broke, Boaz ensured Ruth's safety. He filled her shawl with grain, a silent promise of provision, and sent her home unseen. The gift carried both symbolic and practical meaning. It was sustenance for her household, and a sign that she had been received with honor. Naomi, upon seeing Ruth return with abundance, understood at once that divine favor was unfolding. Her eyes, once dimmed by grief, now gleamed with renewed faith. She counseled Ruth to wait patiently, confident that Boaz would not rest until the matter was settled. The night on the threshing floor stands as one of Scripture's most tender moments, where human courage met divine grace. Ruth's trust placed her beneath the wings of both earthly protection and heavenly care. Boaz, embodying the heart of redemption, became a reflection of the Redeemer to come. Their actions spoke a language deeper than words, a language of faith, honor, and love, sanctified by obedience. Every heart that seeks refuge under God's covering finds what Ruth found that night: peace in uncertainty, dignity in vulnerability, and purpose in waiting. The threshing floor, once a symbol of labor, became a place of covenant. In the quiet of that encounter, destiny advanced one more step toward fulfillment, carried on the wings of faith and the fragrance of redemption waiting to bloom. Morning light returned to Bethlehem with a quiet glow as Boaz rose from his rest, his heart steady yet resolved. The night's encounter lingered in his thoughts, not as scandal or confusion, but as revelation. He understood what Ruth's presence at the threshing floor meant, both spiritually and lawfully. She had invoked the right of redemption, a sacred principle within Israel's tradition that preserved family inheritance and lineage. Boaz knew that his next actions would not only determine her future, but uphold the honor of generations before him. His spirit was calm because love guided him, not desire. True affection waits, protects, and seeks righteousness before fulfillment. Every step Boaz took toward the city gate was a step toward integrity. It was there, among the elders and witnesses, that legal matters were settled. As he gathered 10 men to sit beside him, a sense of purpose filled the air. Another man, a nearer kinsman, was summoned, one who had the first right to redeem Naomi's land and, by extension, Ruth's hand. Boaz presented the matter plainly, his words measured and clear. The nearer relative initially expressed willingness to redeem the property, attracted perhaps by its practical benefit. Yet when Boaz revealed that redemption included marriage to Ruth, a Moabite widow, the man hesitated. Fear of complicating inheritance led him to decline. That moment sealed Boaz's right to act as redeemer, not through ambition, but through divine alignment. Witnesses confirmed the transaction with the ancient symbol of exchanging a sandal, a gesture representing the transfer of legal responsibility. Boaz stood before the elders and declared his intent to redeem all that belonged to Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, and to take Ruth as his wife. His voice carried both strength and reverence, acknowledging not only the law, but the grace that moved beneath it. The people blessed him, invoking prayers that his house would flourish as those of Israel's patriarchs, and that Ruth, the foreigner, would be honored among their people. It was a moment where justice met mercy, where duty and affection became one. Ruth's loyalty had brought her to Bethlehem as a widow, but faith had transformed her standing. What began as a journey of survival had turned into a covenant of restoration. Her heart, once burdened by uncertainty, now found rest in the promise of redemption. Boaz's love was not impulsive. It was steadfast, anchored in respect and guided by divine timing. The union that followed would become more than a marriage. It was a symbol of how God brings fullness to what had been emptied, light to what had been shadowed by loss. Naomi, who had once named herself bitter, now watched the unfolding of grace with astonishment. The same hands that once gathered scraps from the edges of a field now held a future secured by kindness and obedience. Redemption had come not through dramatic intervention, but through faith lived out in quiet moments, through choices grounded in honor. Naomi's heart, softened and restored, could finally glimpse the purpose behind her suffering. God had not forsaken her. He had been guiding her every step toward this moment of renewal. Boaz's decision exemplified love that honors rather than consumes. His affection for Ruth was expressed through protection, provision, and patience. He saw her not as an object of pity, but as a woman of valor whose faith had illuminated her path. Together, they would rebuild what famine and death had torn apart, not only for themselves, but for those who would come after them. In their union, heaven's redemptive pattern took form in flesh and blood, turning tragedy into testimony. Every act of redemption in Scripture foreshadows the greater redemption that flows from divine compassion. Boaz's willingness to take on the role of Redeemer reflected the heart of God Himself, who restores what humanity cannot repair. Through Ruth and Boaz, love revealed its truest nature, patient, selfless, and restorative. Their story spoke of a grace that never rushes but arrives exactly when hearts are ready to receive it. By the time the dust of the city gate settled, Bethlehem had witnessed the fulfillment of a promise older than anyone present could comprehend. A Moabite woman, once foreign to Israel's covenant, had become a cornerstone in its future. Through Boaz's honorable choice, two lives joined not by chance, but by divine orchestration. Love had done its work, not through grand gestures, but through faithfulness, righteousness, and the quiet power of redemption. A gentle joy filled the air of Bethlehem as the wedding of Ruth and Boaz approached. What began in famine and sorrow now blossomed into abundance and laughter. The town that had once whispered about Naomi's misfortune now gathered in celebration of her family's restoration. The fields that had seen Ruth labor in humility now echoed with songs of blessing. This union was not merely the joining of two hearts, but the merging of two destinies. The hands that once gleaned grain in the heat of the sun now prepared to receive a covenant of love and belonging. Ruth's transformation from widow to bride carried a beauty that transcended circumstance. She had walked through grief, exile, and uncertainty, yet faith had kept her steady. Her love for Naomi had guided her steps. Her humility had opened doors, and her trust had led her into grace. The same woman who once entered Bethlehem with nothing now stood clothed in joy, surrounded by people who had come to admire her character. Her story was not one of chance, but of divine choreography, every hardship, every decision leading to this moment of fulfillment. Boaz, a man seasoned by wisdom and grounded in faith, approached marriage with reverence. His love for Ruth was not built on novelty but on admiration. He had watched her integrity, her compassion, her perseverance, and saw in her the reflection of divine strength. Their union stood as a living testament to how love born of righteousness can heal generations. He had redeemed her not out of obligation, but from a heart touched by grace. Together, they embodied the truth that faith can transform suffering into blessing and loss into legacy. Naomi's heart overflowed with gratitude as she witnessed this transformation. The woman who had returned home empty now held her hands over a future filled with promise. Every tear she had shed became a seed of restoration. The marriage of Ruth and Boaz was not only a blessing for them, but a redemption for Naomi's entire household. The bitterness that once defined her was now replaced with laughter, her faith renewed by the evidence of divine goodness unfolding before her eyes. Seasons turned, and joy deepened further when Ruth bore a son. The cries of new life filled the home, echoing through the same streets that had once whispered of despair. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi, rejoicing that God had not left her without a redeemer. They placed the child in her arms, and she held him close, her face softened by tears of gratitude. This child, Obed, would carry not only the legacy of Boaz and Ruth, but the hope of an entire nation. His birth marked the continuation of a promise stretching back to Abraham and forward toward a future beyond imagining. Every mother's lullaby carries history, but Naomi's song that night carried redemption. The same arms that once felt empty now held the fulfillment of divine promise. Ruth's faith had opened the door to blessings that reached beyond her lifetime. The foreign widow who once gleaned for survival now nurtured the lineage of kings. Such transformation reveals the character of divine love, faithful, redemptive, and abundant beyond human measure. Celebration in Bethlehem was not only for the child, but for the story behind him. Ruth's courage, Boaz's honor, and Naomi's endurance had together formed a living parable of restoration. Each of them had faced loss, yet through faith and grace, they became participants in a divine narrative that would shape the destiny of the world. What began as tragedy had blossomed into legacy, proving that hope, once planted, can grow even in the hardest soil. Ruth's journey from widowhood to motherhood mirrors the journey of every heart that has walked through pain toward renewal. Her story reminds us that faith does not erase suffering but transforms it. From the ashes of grief rose a love that would one day cradle a king. Every step, every tear, every act of devotion had built toward this revelation, that redemption is never confined to one moment, but continues to unfold through every generation touched by its grace. Generations later, when people spoke the name of Ruth, they did so with reverence. Her story had woven itself into the heart of Israel's identity, not as a tale of romance alone, but as a testament to what faith and loyalty can accomplish. From her union with Boaz came Obed, and from Obed came Jesse, and from Jesse came David, the shepherd boy who would become king. A foreign widow from Moab became the great-grandmother of Israel's most beloved ruler. The threads of her life, humble and unassuming, had been part of a divine pattern leading to the throne and ultimately to the Messiah. Legacy often grows quietly, unnoticed in its beginnings. When Ruth gleaned in the fields or knelt beside Naomi, she could not have known that her choices would echo through eternity. Her faithfulness in ordinary moments became the foundation for extraordinary destiny. The God who guided her steps through famine and foreign soil was the same God who would one day send his Son through her lineage. History remembers kings and prophets, but heaven remembers the hearts that trusted in unseen promises. Every act of kindness leaves an imprint far beyond its moment. Ruth's devotion to Naomi altered not only their lives, but the trajectory of a nation. Through her, God demonstrated that his plan is not confined by nationality or birthright. Grace transcends boundaries. The inclusion of a Moabite woman in the lineage of Christ reveals that redemption belongs to all who trust in him. Her story shattered the limits of cultural expectation and invited the world to see that love and faith can rewrite any heritage. Bethlehem, once the place of Ruth's humble arrival, became a symbol of divine continuity. Centuries after her footsteps traced its dusty roads, another woman would travel there, carrying a child who embodied redemption itself. The fields that once witnessed Ruth's labor would stand beneath the same sky that shone upon the birth of Jesus. Her life had prepared the soil of history for the coming of salvation. Through her obedience, God built a bridge between human frailty and divine fulfillment. Legacy is not measured by power, but by impact that endures. Ruth's influence reached beyond her lifetime, inspiring countless hearts to believe that faith can transform the impossible. Her name, once foreign on the lips of Israel, became a word of honor, synonymous with devotion and courage. She entered history through humility and left it crowned with purpose. Her story endures because it speaks to every generation's longing for hope that redeems even the darkest journey. Naomi's restoration, Boaz's righteousness, and Ruth's faith together form a portrait of divine providence. Each of them played a role in revealing the nature of redemption, its patience, its cost, and its beauty. Their story reminds the world that no act of obedience is forgotten, no gesture of love wasted. Even when paths seem hidden, God's hand is at work, weaving connections that will one day reveal meaning beyond comprehension. When the chroniclers of Israel traced genealogies, they preserved Ruth's name with purpose. She stood as a reminder that God's mercy welcomes those once distant, that grace is not limited by origin, but by the willingness of the heart to believe. Through her, generations learned that faith is not inherited, but chosen, that loyalty can change destinies, and that love rooted in truth can outlive time itself. Every reader who hears Ruth's story stands within its legacy. Her courage calls hearts to trust through uncertainty. Her devotion invites love without condition, and her faith testifies that God's redemption is both personal and eternal. The life of one woman, shaped by loss and guided by faith, changed the world forever, proving that divine love can take the smallest act of obedience and turn it into history's greatest gift. Every story written in Scripture speaks to the human heart because it mirrors the longings and struggles that live within every soul. Ruth's journey, though ancient, continues to resonate with timeless truth. Her path from loss to restoration shows that divine love is not distant or abstract. It moves quietly through everyday life, shaping ordinary choices into extraordinary outcomes. The same God who guided Ruth through famine, exile, and uncertainty still leads hearts through wilderness seasons today, whispering that faith is never wasted when placed in his hands. Ruth's devotion to Naomi reflects the essence of love that endures even when logic suggests retreat. Her willingness to remain by Naomi's side, to share in her sorrow and rebuild from nothing, speaks to the kind of loyalty that transcends emotion. In a world often shaped by convenience and fleeting affection, her steadfastness stands as a light that challenges us to love deeply, to remain faithful even when the path grows dark. Love, in its purest form, does not seek comfort but truth, and through truth it finds redemption. Every generation faces moments when faith must be chosen over fear. Ruth chose a God she barely knew, a land she had never seen, and a future she could not predict. That choice changed everything. Her courage teaches that trust in divine purpose often requires leaving behind certainty. Faith, by its nature, is a step into the unknown guided only by hope. Yet that single step, taken with sincerity, can alter the course of an entire life, and in Ruth's case, the course of history. Boaz's role in Ruth's story reminds us of the power of compassion anchored in righteousness. His actions were not driven by obligation, but by an inner conviction that doing good is never optional for those who walk with God. He saw beyond Ruth's foreign identity to the strength of her heart. His respect and kindness turned despair into safety, and his integrity restored dignity where shame once lingered. Through him, we learn that love rooted in justice heals wounds that the world overlooks. Naomi's transformation from bitterness to joy speaks to those who have walked through seasons of loss. Her pain was real, her grief deep, Yet grace found her in the quiet return to Bethlehem. Her life reminds that sorrow is not the final chapter for those who trust in divine goodness. Even when hope seems gone, restoration is being written behind the curtain of time. She thought herself forgotten, yet through Ruth and Boaz, her name and lineage became part of eternity's story. Modern hearts often search for meaning in a world filled with noise and distraction. Ruth's story offers clarity. Purpose is not found in the pursuit of ease, but in the posture of faith. Each act of humility, every choice to love, every moment of perseverance becomes a seed planted in the soil of eternity. We may never see the full fruit of our faith, but heaven does not forget even the smallest gesture born from devotion. The divine story continues through those who choose kindness over cynicism and hope over despair. Ruth's life reveals that redemption is not reserved for the powerful, but offered to all who believe. Her origin in Moab, her humble labor, her quiet faith, all became vessels through which God's grace flowed. No past disqualifies a willing heart. Every life, no matter how ordinary it appears, can become part of something divine when surrendered to love's guidance. The same redeeming power that transformed Ruth's destiny continues to move through hearts today, inviting each person to step into renewal. Her story closes not with grandeur, but with legacy. Through her faith, nations were touched, kings were born, and salvation entered the world. The beauty of her journey lies in its simplicity, a reminder that greatness begins with obedience, that miracles grow from faithfulness, and that God still writes through those who trust his unseen hand. Ruth's life continues to whisper across generations that hope never dies where love and faith remain alive. Ruth's story is not just history, it is an invitation to trust when understanding fades, to love when it costs, and to believe that redemption is always within reach. Each viewer, each listener, carries within them the same potential for divine transformation that lived within Ruth. No matter the loss, no matter the past, there is always a path that leads from famine to fullness, from sorrow to joy, from isolation to belonging. Her legacy is not confined to ancient pages. It breathes through the hearts of all who dare to hope again. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to let its message continue beyond this video. Subscribe to the channel so you can join future journeys through the timeless wisdom of Scripture. Like this video if you felt inspired by Ruth's faith and courage. Share your thoughts in the comments, letting others know what part of her story moved you most. And most importantly, share this video with those you love, so that the message of redemption, loyalty, and hope can reach hearts that need it today. Because love, once shared, multiplies, and just as Ruth's story changed the world through faith, your act of sharing can carry light into someone's darkness. Let her story live on through you.